That morning, the air in Wattle Creek was sticky, a thin mist rolling slowly down from the hinterland ridges. The town's usual peace felt like it was holding its breath, storing a big secret. In the distance, the sharp laugh of a kookaburra cut through the sound of roosters. The splash of aerators in the prawn farm kept a steady, quiet rhythm. But behind that calm, something horrific was waiting. On a dirt track connecting the paddocks and the farm, an old bloke named Old Barry walked slowly, carrying a bucket and a small net. He was well past 60, his hair white, but he still had the drive to look after his ponds. He was heading out to check the previous night's prawn harvest, same as he'd done since he was a young man. For Barry, the farm wasn't just a living, it was where he'd pinned his hopes for his kids and grandkids. His steps stopped dead. His eyes fixed on something floating in the corner of the pond. At first, he thought it was just an old hessian sack that had drifted with the slow current. But as he got closer, his body began to tremble. Long, dark hair fanned out on the water's surface, clinging wetly and shifting with the small ripples. Barry swallowed hard. His heart hammered faster than usual. When he was just a few meters away, the pale face of a woman was unmistakably clear. Her eyes were empty, staring at the sky. Her lips were blue, lifeless. Barry dropped the bucket from his hand. The water inside spilled out, mixing with the mud. He stumbled back a few steps, then yelled, his voice raw and full of terror. "Jesus Christ! There's a body in the pond." His voice echoed, breaking the morning silence. A few farmhands working in the nearby paddocks looked up, then started running towards the sound. Within minutes, the news had spread through the whole town. Locals started arriving, their faces pale. Some covered their mouths with a bit of cloth. Others pulled their kids back, telling them to stay away. A few were reckless, trying to get a closer look. An old woman whispered, trembling, "Oh my God, who is she?" A man nearby answered, his voice hesitant. "Doesn't look like a local. Reckon she's from the city." The tension grew as a few young blokes tried to lift the body to the bank. When they managed to get her out, everyone went silent. The victim's clothes were shabby. There were ligature marks on her neck. Her wrists were covered in bruises, as if they'd been tied tightly. Not long after, Mayor Russell "Rusty" Smith arrived, huffing and puffing, his face panicked. His breath came in ragged gasps, even though the morning was still cool. "Is it true? There's a body?" he asked, his voice shaking. Old Barry nodded weakly. "Yeah, Rusty. We just pulled her out of the pond." Rusty stared at the lifeless body and swallowed hard. He tried to calm the locals, though his own eyes were clearly filled with fear. "Nobody touch anything else. We wait for the coppers. Don't make a scene, everyone. Stay calm." But his words sounded more like a worried plea than the commanding voice of a town leader. Whispers and theories began to bubble up from the crowd. "Reckon it's murder. Could be someone dumped from the city. What if some bloody criminal gang has moved into town?" The voices mixed into a rising panic. Small children started to cry, frightened. Mothers pulled themselves closer together, while the men just looked at each other with suspicion. Wattle Creek, usually so quiet, had become a center of panic. It wasn't long before the wail of a siren split the air. 2 police cars entered the town. Uniformed officers got out quickly, followed by a young investigator named Detective Inspector Jack Nolan. With firm steps, he approached the crowd and spoke in a loud, clear voice. "All right, everyone, please move back. This is officially a crime scene. Don't touch a thing." His decisive tone made the locals shuffle back, though the tension remained. Nolan and his team began examining the body. They took photos, noted every detail, then covered the woman with a black sheet. A junior officer whispered to Nolan. "Sir, there are definite ligature marks on her neck." Nolan nodded grimly, then looked up at the crowd with a dark expression. "This wasn't an accident. There's clear evidence of foul play." Those words made some of the locals gasp. Some covered their mouths. One woman nearly fainted. Old Barry just stood there, frozen. His eyes stared blankly at the pond water, which now felt alien to him. "Why my farm?" he mumbled. Mayor Rusty, standing behind the crowd, looked pale. He wiped his forehead, which was clammy with cold sweat. He was overcome with a deep unease, more than just the horror of seeing a body. He felt like this wasn't a coincidence. It felt like the past, a past he'd tried to bury, was coming back to demand a reckoning. Meanwhile, Nolan turned to Rusty and said sternly, "Mr. Mayor, I need you to gather all the townsfolk at the community hall this afternoon. We need to find out if anyone recognizes the victim." Rusty nodded quickly, though his face grew even paler. "Of course, Inspector. Whatever you need." Before the tension could ease, a local suddenly screamed hysterically, pointing to the other side of the pond. "Christ! There's another one." Everyone spun around. From the southern end of the pond, the body of another woman was slowly surfacing. Her hair was splayed out on the water. The crowd descended into chaos. People screamed, one man fell to his knees. Others just ran, crying. Inspector Nolan immediately gave orders. "Secure the other side of the pond. Now? We need to know exactly how many we are dealing with." That day, Wattle Creek officially lost its peace. The prawn farm, once a source of life, was now spitting out body after body. No one knew when it would end. But everyone knew this was the start of a dark mystery that would shake the nearby city of Stoneford and the whole region. That afternoon, the Wattle Creek Community Hall was packed. The scorching heat made the air feel thick and suffocating, made worse by the anxiety gripping everyone. There weren't enough plastic chairs, so many people were standing, pressed together. Others sat on the linoleum floor. Panicked whispers came from every corner. Tense faces, no smiles. It was as if the shadow of death was clinging to the hall's walls. At the front of the room, Inspector Nolan stood tall. His face was serious, his eyes scanning every person present. Beside him, Mayor Rusty Smith looked agitated, still wiping sweat from his brow. Even with the old ceiling fans whirring overhead, the heat was unbearable. Rusty tried to smile at the crowd, but it was a stiff, forced thing, more like fear than the calm of a leader. Nolan held up a hand for quiet. His voice filled the room. "People of Wattle Creek. This morning, we found not just one, but more than 2 bodies in the pond. And based on my team's reports, the victim count is likely to rise." The room erupted. Small shrieks mixed with sobs. One woman cried loudly, burying her face in her hands, as if imagining the victim could be one of her own. "Settle down," Nolan called out, raising his voice. "We need your cooperation. If anyone recognizes the victims, or if you've seen any suspicious strangers around, report it immediately." Mayor Rusty tried to add, his voice hoarse, "Mates. Neighbors. We have to stick together. Don't listen to rumors. Let the police do their job." But his words sounded weak, unable to calm anyone, and only added to the doubt. The tension spiked when another police officer rushed in. His face was pale, and he was out of breath. He whispered to Nolan, but some in the front could still hear. "Sir, there's more. Found another 5 bodies on the south bank." The hall exploded. People jumped to their feet. Some screamed hysterically. "Jesus, 5 more," a man yelled, his voice cracking. Nolan closed his eyes for a second, then stared back at the crowd. "I want everyone to stay away from the farm. Do not go near it. Let my team work." But the news was already out. In an instant, Wattle Creek was swarming. National news crews arrived with big cameras. More police cars lined the town's usually quiet main street. Sirens blared for most of the day, making the town feel like a disaster zone. Radios in homes blared the latest. Breaking news: 46 female bodies have been found floating in a prawn farm on the outskirts of Stoneford. The reporter's voice made the locals even more terrified. In their homes, the fear grew. Parents forbade their teenage daughters from leaving the house. The local cafe and pub closed early. The streets, usually busy in the late afternoon, were suddenly deserted, like a ghost town. People locked their doors, peering out from behind curtains. For them, the prawn farm, once a symbol of prosperity, had become a source of absolute terror. Amidst this panic, a young woman walked calmly down the main street. She had long dark hair, a slim figure, and looked professional in a blue blazer, carrying a folder full of car brochures. She smiled politely at a woman standing on her front porch. "Afternoon. If you're thinking about a new car, we've got a great 0% finance deal on." Her voice was soft, as if nothing at all was wrong with the town. The woman just stared at her, confused, then quickly shook her head. "No, love. Now's not the time to be talking about cars." Sarah Jenkins just gave a small smile. Her gaze briefly swept over the panicked town before she walked on, light on her feet. But behind that smile, something was unreadable. Her eyes were sharp, as if she was calculating something. No one suspected that this beautiful, ordinary-looking woman was carrying a dark secret. To the people of Wattle Creek, she was just a car saleswoman. But to herself, this town was a stage, and a story of revenge was just getting started. Meanwhile, at the community hall, Inspector Nolan pulled Mayor Rusty into a small office for a private word. "Mr. Mayor, let's be honest. This case isn't simple. 46 female bodies. This is potentially the biggest crime I've ever handled. Your town could be the site of a massacre." Rusty looked down, his hands shaking. "I don't know anything about it, Inspector. This is a quiet town." Nolan stared at him. "Funny thing is, some of the victims were apparently seen around here recently. That means they had a reason to come to Wattle Creek. We're looking into it. If you have any information about strangers, about any dodgy groups that have been through here, you tell me." Rusty swallowed. Dark shadows from his past began to surface, images of the town co-op he'd started years ago with a few others. The sweet promises he'd made that turned into fraud. The people who lost their money and never got answers. But he held his tongue, not daring to reveal everything. "No, Inspector. Nothing I know of." Nolan sighed. "All right. But if I find evidence to the contrary, I'll be back to ask again." The conversation left a heavy silence. Rusty left the office looking sick, while Nolan felt more certain than ever that something was being hidden in this town. By evening, the police team had pulled every body from the water. The final count was 46 female bodies. They didn't know each other, but there was a faint pattern. Most were between 20 and 40. Their bodies showed signs of brutal violence before they were dumped in the pond. Wattle Creek officially changed from a peaceful town to the site of a mysterious slaughter. Locals gathered on their front porches, though most only dared to peek from behind their windows. The fear was thick, especially after learning the sheer number of victims. In the middle of it all, Sarah Jenkins sat calmly on a plastic chair at the local cafe. She sipped a hot drink, her folder of car brochures open on the table. A slight smile played on her lips. Her calm aura made a few of the locals stare. How could anyone be so relaxed, trying to sell things, in the middle of a tragedy? But for Sarah, the cafe was just a quick stop. Her mind was busy with a list of names, the names of those who were next. That night, the air in Wattle Creek felt heavy. The mist rolled in faster than usual, covering the deserted streets. Only a few dim porch lights cut through the darkness. Locals refused to go out, locking themselves in with their families. The sound of crickets from the bush seemed to echo the fear spreading from house to house. At the temporary police post in the hall, Inspector Nolan sat staring at a large whiteboard covered in notes. Photos of the victims were pinned up. Under each was a name, age, address, and when they were last seen. Red marker lines connected one photo to another, forming a pattern that wasn't yet clear. Constable Kate Ryan stood beside him, holding a file. "Sir, we have a new witness statement," Kate said quietly. 3 of the victims were seen talking to a woman. Locals say she's a car saleswoman. Name's Sarah Jenkins. Nolan raised an eyebrow, then nodded. "I found a car brochure in one of the victims' bags. Had a phone number. We checked it, it's a legit dealership. So legally, she's exactly who she says she is. But why are so many victims connected to her?" The question hung in the air. Nolan tapped the table with his fingers, frowning at the board. Is it possible she is deliberately targeting them? He didn't answer his own question. He took a long breath. "My gut says yes, Kate, but we need proof. Not just a hunch." Kate nodded, though her face was still full of doubt. Deep down, she felt something was off about this Sarah woman. Meanwhile, in a small rental cottage at the edge of town, Sarah sat alone at a simple wooden table. Her blue blazer was folded neatly on a chair. Her face, free of makeup, looked pale, but her eyes were burning. On the table, an old wooden box was open, filled with yellowed papers, receipts, and debt notices. Her hand trembled as she touched a faded letter bearing her mother's name, Sharon Jenkins. A tear fell, but she wiped it away angrily. "Mum, they are all going to pay," she whispered. Her memory flashed back. She was just a teenager when the town co-op, led by Rusty Smith and his crew, started selling dreams. They promised huge returns for anyone who saved or invested. Her mother, Sharon, believed them completely. She handed over all her savings, even took out loans to invest more. "Trust me, love, this is for your future," her mother had said. But what came wasn't prosperity, it was disaster. A few months later, the co-op suddenly went bankrupt. All the money was gone. The board members vanished. The debts piled up. The pressure from neighbors was crushing. Until one night, Sharon Jenkins chose to end her life with a rope. That night, Sarah's world collapsed. From that dark moment, Sarah swore her life would be dedicated to one thing: revenge. She studied hard, built a life, used her beauty as a weapon and her words as a trap, until she got the job as a car saleswoman. It gave her the freedom to travel and the perfect cover to get close to her targets. The car brochures were just a mask. What she was really carrying was a list of sins. In her notebook, names were written neatly. Several were already crossed out in red ink. They were the victims now floating in the pond. Her eyes stopped on one name, Brenda Clark. Brenda had been the co-op's treasurer. A smooth talker, and just as sly. She was the one who collected the deposits, including her mother's. Brenda had even been called a friend by Sharon. Sarah gritted her teeth, staring at the name. "Your turn is coming soon," she whispered, her gaze hardening. On the other side of town, the lights were still on at Brenda Clark's house. The middle-aged woman was busy making dinner. Her face was starting to wrinkle, but her arrogant streak hadn't faded. She still thought she was smarter than everyone else. Her husband was bedridden, disabled from an illness. Her kids rarely visited. But Brenda never truly regretted her past. As far as she was concerned, what happened was just a failed business. If the co-op had worked, they'd all be praising me, she often told herself. As the night grew late, Brenda opened her door to sweep the veranda. A black car pulled up out front. A beautiful woman got out, smiling warmly. "Well, look who it is," Brenda called out. "Still shifting cars, are we, Sarah?" Sarah smiled, as if she didn't have a hateful thought in her head. "Yeah, Brenda. Just passing through, thought I'd stop by. You never know when you might need a new set of wheels." They chatted for a while. From the outside, it looked perfectly normal. But behind Sarah's smile was a look of pure hatred that Brenda couldn't see. Sarah knew the time wasn't right just yet. She wanted to make Brenda feel fear first, the shadow of death, always watching. That night, Inspector Nolan got a new report. A local reported seeing a black car frequently parked near Brenda's house. Nolan noted the license plate and recognized it immediately. "This car belongs to Sarah Jenkins," he said quietly. His mind filled with questions. Was she just passing through, or was she the missing piece of the puzzle? Nolan stared at the board full of photos. Slowly, he was starting to see the pattern narrow. The night in Wattle Creek was so quiet, only the sound of crickets in the bush could be heard. In her small rental, Sarah Jenkins sat at the table under a dim lamp. Her face was serious, her gaze fixed on a black notebook. She turned the pages. Her finger stopped at the name Brenda Clark. Beside the name, she drew a faint cross, as if marking that the time was near. Sarah then opened a drawer and took out a white envelope. Inside was a photocopy of an old receipt from the town co-op. At the bottom, Brenda's signature was clear, acknowledging the deposit. She smiled faintly and slipped the envelope into a clear plastic bag. "I'll leave this on her doorstep tomorrow morning," she mumbled. For Sarah, fear was the first punishment, before death. She wanted Brenda to feel what it was like to be haunted by the past, just as her mother had been haunted by debt and pressure until she chose to die. The next morning, Brenda woke earlier than usual. The air was still cold, dew clinging to the leaves. With heavy eyes, she opened the front door, intending to sweep. But her gaze fell on a plastic bag lying on the doormat. She picked it up, her hand shaking. As soon as she saw the contents, her legs went weak. Inside was the old receipt, with her own signature. Brenda clapped a hand over her mouth, stifling a scream. How is this here?" Her voice trembled. Her face went ashen. She quickly shut the door and hid the bag in a drawer. But the fear had already taken root. For the next few days, Brenda couldn't sleep. Every shadow in the corner of the room made her feel watched. The sound of the wind at night sounded like whispers. She thought she heard footsteps outside, but when she looked, no one was there. Her disabled husband just lay in his bed, unaware. Brenda started to unravel. She was pale, her eyes sunken, her movements jumpy. She didn't dare tell the neighbors, afraid her old secrets would come out. Meanwhile, Inspector Nolan was growing more suspicious. Surveillance reports confirmed Sarah's black car was seen stopping near Brenda's house several times. The pattern was too obvious. The victims were always seen with Sarah before they ended up in the pond. But without hard evidence, he couldn't make an accusation. That night, Nolan assigned 2 officers to watch Brenda's house. "Let's see what her next move is," he said, staring at the town map covered in red circles. In her rental, Sarah prepared for her next step. She put on a long black coat, hiding her face behind a thin scarf. She gripped a small box. Inside was an old necklace. Her mother's necklace. The one Brenda had borrowed and never returned. That night, she walked slowly towards Brenda's house. The streets were empty, just the sound of light rain tapping on the roofs. Her steps were calm, but her heart was pounding. Tonight, she would prove that the past never stays dead. Brenda, restless inside, heard a soft knock on the door. She jumped, her breath catching. Shaking, she opened the door a crack. Nobody. Just a small box on the doormat. She picked it up. When she opened it, her eyes widened. This necklace. She remembered it clearly. It belonged to Sharon Jenkins. She had forced Sharon to hand it over as collateral for a co-op payment, and then never gave it back. Brenda's body shook violently. No. She can't know. She can't. Tears streamed down her face. For the first time in her life, Brenda felt that death was close. From a distance, Sarah watched from the darkness. She saw Brenda collapse to the floor, clutching the box and sobbing. A cold smile touched Sarah's lips. Seeing that fear was its own satisfaction. But as she turned to leave, she froze. A deep voice came from behind her. Sarah Jenkins. She turned slowly. Standing in front of her was Inspector Nolan, with a young officer, Fajar. Nolan's gaze was sharp, suspicious. Fajar held a bright torch. Sarah kept her calm smile, though her heart was pounding. Well, hello, Inspector. Fancy seeing you here. I was just passing by. Is something wrong? Her voice was smooth, almost flawless. Nolan stared at her. Passing by? Or were you here for a reason? Sarah didn't answer. She just smiled faintly and walked away. Nolan sighed. He knew this wasn't a coincidence. That woman was hiding a massive secret. From that night on, he swore he'd find the truth, no matter what. Inside her house, Brenda was still on the floor, pale, clutching the old necklace. Her mind flashed back to when she'd laughed at Sharon for begging for the necklace back. If you want this back, you'd better find more money, she had said. Now, those words hit her like a truck. The past she thought was buried had returned to drag her into the shadow of death. That morning, a thin fog still covered Wattle Creek. The birds were quiet, as if they, too, felt the anxiety in the air. In her wooden house, Brenda Clark sat stunned in an old chair. Her face was pale, her eyes red from a sleepless night. On her lap was the small box holding Sharon Jenkins's necklace. Her hand trembled every time she touched it, as if it was cursed. Brenda looked over at her husband, lying weak on his bed. He'd been paralyzed for years, able only to stare blankly. Brenda whispered, her voice cracking, "I'm scared." Tears fell. She felt like someone was constantly watching her, haunting her. Every creak of the door, every gust of wind on the roof, sounded like Sharon's ghost, come to collect. A voice that seemed to say, the old debt hasn't been paid. On the other side of town, Sarah prepared herself perfectly. Her hair was neat, a white blazer fitting her elegantly. A small smile graced her face. But in the small bag she carried, there weren't just car brochures, but also the black notebook full of names. She knew her time with Brenda was drawing near. She wanted to break the woman, slowly, before the end. Meanwhile, at the police post, Inspector Nolan stared at the investigation board, his eyes sharper than ever. The red lines he'd drawn were forming a clear pattern. Almost all the victims had a history with the Old Town Co-op. The name Brenda Clark, treasurer, appeared repeatedly. Nolan tapped the table. Beside him, Constable Kate Ryan looked on. "Sir, it seems like all roads lead back to Sarah." But we still don't have hard proof. Nolan nodded. You're right, Kate. We can't just accuse her. But I'm certain she's more than just a car saleswoman. She's directly connected to the co-op's past. We need to watch her closer. Kate noted the instruction. In her heart, she felt something about Sarah. There was a pain in the woman's eyes, a pain you only get from a terrible loss. That afternoon, Sarah visited Brenda's house again, with a simple excuse. She knocked and waited patiently. Brenda, still terrified, opened the door, her hands shaking. Seeing Sarah's friendly smile, she stiffened. Good afternoon, Brenda. Just passing by. Here's our latest brochure. Maybe one of your kids needs a car for work. Sarah's voice was gentle. Brenda swallowed, taking the brochure with a trembling hand. Thanks. I'll have a look. Sarah noted Brenda's pale face, then leaned in slightly. You look tired, Brenda. Is something bothering you? The question made Brenda freeze. Her heart pounded. Cold sweat broke out on her forehead. She wanted to scream that she knew Sarah was haunting her. But her tongue was stuck. Sarah smiled faintly, then whispered, so only Brenda could hear. The past never really disappears, does it? It always comes back. Brenda flinched, her face ashen. But Sarah just excused herself politely, leaving Brenda to crumble. That night, Brenda couldn't sleep. She heard faint crying. She saw Sharon's shadow in every corner. She felt the door creak, heard footsteps on the veranda, though no one was there. She finally snapped, screaming hysterically. Leave me alone. Get out. Her screams alerted the neighbors, who ran to her house. They found Brenda on the floor, her face wet with tears, clutching the old necklace. They didn't know what to do, so they called the police. Inspector Nolan and Kate Ryan arrived quickly. They found Brenda in a state of delirium. Brenda, what happened? Nolan asked calmly. She looked at him with wild eyes. She came. She knows everything. Nolan frowned. Who do you mean? Brenda just cried harder. Kate noticed the wooden table in the corner. On it was the car brochure. A small note was handwritten on it. Sometimes, life makes you pay back old debts. Kate shivered. She looked at Nolan. This wasn't a coincidence, sir. Sarah left her mark. Nolan picked up the brochure. His face hardened. He knew this game couldn't go on. Brenda was now a victim of terror, not just a witness. Police tightened surveillance around her house. Nolan decided to call Sarah in for questioning again. Let's see if she's still smiling when she knows we're getting close, he muttered. In her rental, Sarah sat alone, marking another name in her black book. Her face was cold, her smile thin. Brenda wasn't finished, but the fear was already tearing her apart. Sarah felt satisfied. Even though she knew the police were suspicious, she looked at the night sky. The stars were bright. But for Sarah, they weren't signs of hope. They were just silent witnesses to the long path of revenge she had chosen. The atmosphere at the Wattle Creek police post was tense. The fluorescent lights hummed. Tables were covered in files and photos of the victims. Inspector Nolan sat, his face serious, while Constable Kate Ryan jotted down reports. The air felt heavy. At 9 p.m., the door opened. Sarah Jenkins walked in gracefully. She wore a simple white blouse and a black skirt. Her hair was neat, her face fixed with a calm smile. Good evening, officers. How can I help? Her soft voice almost charmed a few of the junior cops in the room. But not Nolan. His gaze was sharp. "Please, sit down, Ms. Jenkins," he said flatly. Sarah sat, crossed her legs, and placed her small bag on her lap. She looked straight at Nolan, not a hint of fear. "Ms. Jenkins, we have reports that you were seen with several of the victims shortly before their deaths. Can you explain that?" Sarah smiled sweetly. That's probably because of my job, Inspector. I drive around a lot, offering test drives. If people are interested, of course I chat with them. But as for that horrible business, I truly don't know a thing." The answer was plausible. Her tone was sincere. But Nolan wasn't buying it. He studied her, watching every micro-expression. No anxiety, no nervousness. The woman was too calm. Kate Ryan, sitting next to Nolan, watched her too. As a woman, she sensed something different about Sarah. The smile was too sweet, the gaze too cold. Kate noted every word, but her mind kept asking, is this woman really just a saleswoman, or is she hiding an old wound? After a few more questions, Nolan closed his file. "All right, Ms. Jenkins. Thanks for your time. You can go for now, but don't leave town. We might need to speak with you again." Sarah gave a polite smile, stood up, nodded, and walked out. But as she passed through the door, Nolan caught a fleeting glimpse of a different smile. One of hidden satisfaction. Outside, Sarah paused, looking towards the pond, now guarded by police. Floodlights made the water's surface shimmer. But in that shimmer, she saw the faces of the victims she'd already crossed off her list. "Not everyone," she whispered. "There are still debts to be paid." She walked off into the night. Kate, who happened to step outside a minute later, saw Sarah's silhouette in the distance. She looked so calm. Kate clutched her notebook. "My gut tells me she's not just a saleswoman," she mumbled. But she also felt something else. A kind of pity. Meanwhile, Nolan was back at the whiteboard. He added a note next to Sarah Jenkins's name, connected to last 3 victims. He drew red lines connecting her to the photos. The pattern was clearer. But what bothered him wasn't the connection, it was the motive. If Sarah was the killer, what was driving all this? He was sure the answer was in the town's past, in that old, failed co-op. Later that night, in her rental, Sarah opened the old wooden box again. She held the letter with her mother's name. Bitter memories flooded back, her mother's tears, the neighbor's threats, the night she found her mother's body hanging in the bedroom. Tears fell, but she wiped them away. "Mum, I'm almost finished. They are all going to feel the pain you felt," she whispered, her voice breaking. At the police post, Kate stared out the window. She remembered Sarah's eyes, they smiled, but they were sad. "Sir," she whispered to Nolan. What if she's a victim, too?" Nolan turned quickly. "Don't get drawn in by pity, Kate. If she's the killer, she's ended dozens of lives. That's not a small thing." Kate looked down, but her heart was still troubled. She knew the law had to be upheld, but she also knew that deep pain could turn someone into a monster. Rain began to fall, drizzling on the streets of Wattle Creek. The night air turned cold. Inside his council-provided house, Mayor Rusty Smith sat at his desk, agitated. His mind couldn't focus. Since the police started investigating the pond, his name had come up. He knew the old co-op he'd founded could drag him into this. Rusty wiped his sweaty face. "If they find the proof, I'm finished," he muttered. He remembered convincing the town to invest, promising big returns. He'd felt so clever then. But the co-op failed, and he left a lot of broken lives in his wake. Now, those lives were coming back to haunt him. Outside the mayor's house, a dark figure stood behind a tree. Sarah Jenkins watched the house, her eyes cold. She held her notebook. She turned to the last page. Only one name left, not yet crossed out. Russell "Rusty" Smith. A thin smile formed on her lips. One left. After this, it's over, she whispered. At the police station, Inspector Nolan was studying the old co-op archives. The papers were yellowed, but the signatures were clear. The names of the board members were there, including Brenda Clark as treasurer. And at the very top, the signature of a young Rusty Smith. So, the mayor didn't just know, he founded it, Nolan muttered. Kate, sitting nearby, was shocked. So the victims weren't random. They were all involved in the co-op. Nolan nodded. And now, there's one last name left, Rusty Smith. The night grew later. Sarah moved slowly toward the mayor's house, her black coat blending into the dark. In her hand, she carried a small box. Inside was an old photo of her mother, Sharon, holding a co-op debt letter. She planned to leave it on his doorstep. A final message. She didn't know that, from a distance, a pair of eyes was watching. Constable Kate Ryan, assigned to shadow Sarah, held her breath. She saw Sarah heading straight for the mayor's house. This is it, she whispered. Inside, Rusty heard footsteps on his veranda. His heart pounded. He opened the door a crack. No one. Just a small box. His hands shook as he picked it up. When he opened it, his eyes widened. It was a photo of Sharon Jenkins, holding a debt note. A note with Rusty's own signature at the bottom. The mayor's legs gave out. She knows. She knows everything. His voice broke. Sarah watched from the darkness, satisfied by his reaction. She wanted him to feel more than fear. She wanted him to beg, just like her mother had. But before she could move, a sharp voice cut through the rain. Sarah. Stop. Sarah turned. Kate Ryan was standing there, her face tense. Her service pistol was pointed at the ground, a warning. Stop this, Sarah. If you keep going, you're the one who'll end up behind bars. Sarah just smiled faintly. Shouldn't you understand, Kate? You're a woman. You know what it's like to be treated unfairly. They killed my mother, and nobody cared. I'm just collecting an old debt. Kate swallowed. The words hit home. She could feel the pain Sarah carried. But she also knew this wasn't the answer. Her voice was low, but firm. If you do this, Sarah, you're no better than they are. Sarah paused, her eyes glistening. But then she looked back at the house. No. He has to feel it. He's the one responsible. Kate took a step forward, her heart racing. She knew this confrontation could end badly, but this was the only chance to stop her. The rain hammered down on Wattle Creek. In front of the mayor's house, the two women faced each other in the dim light. Sarah, her face wet, eyes sharp with years of grief. Kate, standing firm, trying to hold back a tremor in her hand. Sarah smiled, a bitter, broken smile. You think you can stop me, Kate? You don't know what it's like. My mother didn't just die. She was destroyed by them. Rusty, Brenda, all of them. They stole our lives and then just went on with theirs. I'm just taking back what was stolen. Kate shook her head. I don't know your pain, Sarah. But I know killing him won't bring her back. It just creates more pain. Look at this town. How many families are grieving because of what you've done? Justice. Sarah spat. The justice you talk about is only for people with money. When the co-op collapsed, the police came. They knew who was responsible. But no one was arrested. Nothing happened. So who am I supposed to trust, Kate? Your law is too slow. Inside, Rusty Smith huddled, shaking, clutching the photo. He heard the argument, and the fear paralyzed him. He wanted to scream, but his voice was gone. Kate stepped closer. Sarah, listen to me. I know the pain. But believe me, the law isn't always blind. Inspector Nolan has found hard evidence on Rusty. If you just wait, he will go down. Don't get your hands any dirtier. For a second, Sarah's expression softened. Her face looked fragile. But the image of her mother, hanging, returned. She clutched the box tighter. No, Kate. My mother didn't have time to wait for the law. I can't let them live in peace. Tonight, I end this. Kate knew her words were failing. She had to be bolder. If you do this, you're not a grieving daughter anymore. You're just a killer. Is that what you want? Suddenly, footsteps splashed through the rain. Inspector Nolan, flanked by two other officers, ran up. Sarah. That's enough. Put the box down and come with us. Sarah laughed. Finally, the inspector. You're here to arrest me. While she gestured to the house, lives free. I don't think I'll just surrender. Nolan's face was grim. I'm not protecting him, Sarah. If he's guilty, the law will get him. But your way is wrong. You've gone too far. The tension peaked. Sarah stood tall, fueled by her pain. Kate watched, heart pounding. From inside, Rusty was sobbing, his own past sins crushing him. The air in Wattle Creek stopped. The rain, the flashing lights, all focused on Sarah Jenkins. She stepped towards the house. Her voice, though quiet, cut through the rain. My mother died because of your rotten co-op, Rusty. All our money, all our hope. Gone? I found her hanging, cold. And you. You got to be mayor. Tonight, you pay. Nolan held up a hand. Sarah, listen to me. I know you're hurt. But killing him is not the answer. We have the proof. He will go to jail. Trust me. Sarah laughed, a sound mixed with tears. Your law is too late, Inspector. My mother didn't get to see justice. No one understands. Kate stepped forward, her pistol raised but not aimed. Sarah, I'm a woman, like you. I can feel your pain. But if you kill him, you're just as bad as they are. The words hit Sarah. She paused, her face crumbling. But as she looked at the house, the memory of her mother returned. She clutched the box. No, Kate. I can't stop. This is the only reason I've stayed alive. Just then, the front door creaked open. Rusty Smith stumbled out, pale and terrified. Sarah. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. It was just a business deal that went bad. That was the wrong thing to say. A business deal? Sarah screamed, her voice breaking. You call my mother's death a business deal? She lunged towards the door. Sarah, don't. Kate yelled. Nolan moved in. Stop. Sarah was on the porch. She dropped the box. From her coat, she pulled a small, gleaming knife. Rusty screamed. Please don't. I have a family. Sarah looked back at the police. You were never there for people like my mother. So tonight, I'll make my own justice. In a flash, she raised the knife. Everyone screamed. Kate fired her gun. Crack! The knife flew from Sarah's hand, clattering on the wet porch. Sarah stumbled back, clutching her shoulder, blood seeping through her fingers. Her face was a mask of shock. "Why didn't you let me finish?" she cried out, collapsing. Kate rushed forward, kicking the knife away, and cuffed Sarah's hands. Nolan moved in, supporting Kate. Sarah sat on the wet ground, blood and rain mixing. Her tears flowed freely. "No one understands. My mother. She died in shame. I just wanted to stop the pain." Kate knelt beside her, her own eyes wet. "I understand your pain, Sarah. But killing is never the cure. You only make new wounds." For the first time, Sarah was silent. Rusty Smith was huddled in his doorway, shaking, alive, but shattered by the revelation of his past. Nolan looked at him with cold eyes. "Mr. Mayor, your past has caught up with you. The law is coming for you." That night, Wattle Creek watched as revenge and the law finally collided in the rain. The interrogation room at Stoner Ford Police Station was airless. A single fluorescent light hummed overhead. Sarah Jenkins sat, her hands cuffed, her shoulder bandaged. Her face was pale, but her eyes were still sharp. Across from her, Inspector Nolan laid out a thick file. 46 women are dead, Sarah. All the evidence points to you." Sarah looked down, then gave a small, tired smile. "Good. Then your investigation wasn't a waste of time." Nolan tapped the table. "Do you realize what you've done? This is a mass murder. If you hide behind revenge, the law won't be kind." Sarah looked up, her eyes flashing. "I never expected the law to be kind. The law was too busy protecting men like Rusty Smith. My mother died, and no one cared. Why should I care about your law now?" Behind the one-way glass, Kate Ryan watched, her face grim. Every word Sarah spoke felt like an open wound. Nolan pushed an old, stained document across the table. "This is the Wattle Creek Community Co-op file. Your mother's name, Sharon Jenkins, is in here. You're right. She was defrauded. But tell me, did killing those 46 women make you feel better?" The question hit Sarah hard. She gritted her teeth and whispered, "No. But it was necessary." The door opened, and 2 officers brought in Rusty Smith. He was pale, sweating, and sat down trying to avoid Sarah's gaze. But Sarah's eyes burned into him. "You were the one who convinced my mother to invest. You promised her the world. You knew it was a lie. You were the ringleader, Rusty." Rusty trembled. "It was a long time ago. A misunderstanding. I never meant for." "Enough." Nolan slammed his hand on the table. "The facts are the facts. We have dozens of bodies in the pond, and we have the financial records for the co-op. We will investigate both to the fullest extent." Sarah laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "See? He's finally going to fall. Too bad I'm the one who's the villain here. I just did what the law never bothered to." Kate, hearing this from behind the glass, felt her chest tighten. Sarah was wrong, but she wasn't wrong. In the end, Sarah was led back to her cell. Rusty Smith was formally arrested and detained for further questioning. In the hallway, Kate walked beside Sarah for a moment. "I don't hate you, Sarah," Kate said quietly. "I just hate the path you chose." Sarah looked at her, her eyes heavy. "I used to believe in that path, Kate. But the law was never there for us. So I made my own. News of the interrogation spread. Wattle Creek was in an uproar. The local radio announced that their own mayor was the prime suspect in the old co-op fraud. In her cell, Sarah heard the rain start again. She looked out her small window. It reminded her of the night her mother died. Suddenly, the station alarm blared. Shouts echoed down the hall. Kate ran out. "What's happening?" "It's Rusty. He's escaped," an officer yelled. "He stabbed a guard." Kate's eyes widened. She instinctively looked at Sarah's cell. Sarah was standing, a faint, cold smile on her face. "See what I told you? Your law couldn't even hold him." Kate clenched her fists and ran with the other officers, Nolan right with them. They followed the trail out of the station, into the muddy fields behind the town. The chase led them to an old, abandoned shearing shed. Inside, Rusty was hiding, panting, still holding a small, bloody knife. But as the door creaked open, it wasn't the police who entered. It was Sarah. She'd somehow picked the lock on her cell during the chaos. "Rusty," she said, her voice calm. "We are finally alone." Rusty scrambled back. "How? How did you?" "We've been waiting for this moment for a long time." He lunged with the knife, but Sarah, fueled by years of rage, disarmed him. They wrestled on the dusty floor. Just then, Nolan and Kate burst in. "Sarah, stop." Sarah had Rusty pinned, her hands around his throat. "This is for my mother," she screamed, tears streaming down her face. Kate moved in, trying to pull her off. "Stop it, Sarah. If you do this, you're just the killer they say you are." The words hit Sarah. Her grip faltered. She was still trembling, but her eyes met Kate's. Slowly, her hands unclenched. Rusty gasped for air. Kate pulled Sarah back, holding her as she sobbed. Nolan and the officers secured Rusty Smith. This time, he wasn't getting away. Sarah sat on the floor, her fight gone. "I didn't kill him," she whispered to Kate. Maybe Mum would be proud that I stopped." Kate held her hand tightly. "You chose the right path, Sarah." The courtroom in Stoneford was packed. It was the talk of the nation. Sarah Jenkins sat on one side, Rusty Smith on the other. The prosecution laid out the case. 46 murders. All linked to Sarah. Then they laid out the fraud case. Millions stolen. All linked to Rusty. When Sarah spoke, the room was silent. "I don't regret it. I only did what the law failed to do. My mother died. I just wanted justice." When Rusty spoke, he whimpered. "It was a mistake. A business failure." Kate and Nolan testified. They presented the evidence. The town of Wattle Creek was divided. Some called Sarah a monster. Others called her a hero. The verdict came. Rusty Smith, guilty of fraud and manslaughter, for the suicide he caused. Decades in prison. Sarah Jenkins, guilty of 46 counts of murder. Life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Sarah accepted the verdict calmly. She'd even smiled, just slightly. As they led her away, Kate caught her eye. "Sarah. What you did. It opened everyone's eyes. The town knows the truth now." Sarah looked at her. "Thanks, Kate. You wanted to stop me. But in the end, you're the one who made me stop." The prison van drove away. Sarah looked out the small window. The sky was orange, just like it was the day they buried her mother. The tears came again, but this time, they felt lighter. Wattle Creek slowly began to heal. The prawn farm was eventually cleaned and reopened, after a long town prayer. The kids started playing on the streets again. But the story of Sarah Jenkins,